what I'm going to do now before we take our first break is I want to try to paint kind of the 30,000 foot level of the context of where pipeline safety is nationally. So let's see if I can get the equipment to work. None of these presentations would be, one of the problems we're having is for some reason the screen is cutting off the top of the screen and the bottom of the screen, so some stuff's going to be missing, so I'm going to have to try to point that out. But none of these presentations would be full if I didn't show my three-legged stool analogy. Because one of the things that the Pipeline Safety Trust, moving from our anger and our sorrow of our own tragedy to trying to be more of provide more of a public voice for pipeline safety, is we've really come to believe that pipeline safety is a shared responsibility amongst a number of different groups. And it's a lot like a three-legged stool, where the regulators play their part overseeing the industry. The industry certainly plays the major part because these are industry-owned pipelines. They're operated, maintained, inspected by the industry. They have to play their part. But there certainly is a key role for both local government and the public, and I kind of lump those into the third leg of the stool as the public. And that's the, what's not shown here is the industry, and I wasn't really cutting them off. It's just that we're losing that part of the screen. If there's a computer expert in the room, talk to me at the break. Without any one of the legs, the stool gets wobbly, and the pipeline safety does too. And so I just wanted to make that point that it's real easy for the three different groups to kind of point fingers at each other at times, and sometimes that's really valuable. But we all have kind of a shared responsibility, and there's all things that we all do that can affect pipeline safety. So we need to somehow work together to make that a sturdy stool. There's a dichotomy that the public deals with all the time on pipeline safety, and that's the reality of how safe are pipelines, and talking about risk. And you'll be hearing about that over the next couple days. The reality is that I can't stand up here and tell you how safe pipelines are, because risk is something that everybody has to judge for themselves. I didn't think anything about jumping on an airplane and flying here to Salt Lake City yesterday. My wife, she goes through a 2-week process before she can get on an airplane. So, you know, the way you think about risk is kind of a personal thing. So you'll be hearing a lot over the next couple days to help you wrap your mind around how you think about pipeline safety. I wanted to just show a couple of graphs, and for people that were at the workshops a couple of weeks ago, you've seen these, but these are just graphs that show kind of overall for all of the pipelines in the whole country, and there's 2.5 million miles of pipelines around the country, gives some statistics. And this first one shows significant incidents, and a significant incidence is something that's defined in the regulations, and it's about if there's an injury that requires hospitalization, if there's a death, if there's $50,000 worth of property damage on certain levels of spills from liquid pipelines. And it shows the three major types of pipelines, hazardous liquid being the blue here, distribution pipelines, those are the small lines that bring gas to our homes and businesses, and then the large gas transmission pipelines on the bottom that kind of move lots of natural gas between communities and across states. And if you look at this, you know, the trend line for the hazardous liquid is going down. For distribution, it's stable, and for gas transmission, it looks on this like it may be trending up a little bit. I think if you redid this graph to take into consideration the added miles of pipeline that have been added over the last 20 years, which you can't see that this is a 20-year graph here because the years are getting cut off at the bottom, that might make that more of a stable looking line either. But the one thing to look at is how many incidents there are. This is the number of incidents over here. So the fewest incidents are actually on these big gas transmission lines, and we're talking, you know, 40 to 60 incidents a year on those lines. Liquid pipelines certainly are having more incidents, and to some degree that's because the bar is much higher for their reporting requirements. And the distribution lines go over here. If you look at the next graph, it shows serious incidents, and this is a smaller subset, and you can't even see the bottom, but in serious incidents are only incidents where someone has died or ended up in the hospital. And you can see that it kind of swaps it around where the gas transmission, the little pipelines around our homes, have the most serious incidents. And that, as you'll hear as we go on over the next couple days, kind of makes a lot of sense because these are everywhere in our community. You know, any house that has natural gas has a pipeline running to it, so it makes it real easy for you to get into trouble on a pipeline on your own home and get injured. The bigger pipelines have a much lower, like under 10 incidents a year where someone is injured or unfortunately dies. So very low levels of incidents from lots of these pipelines when you think about 2.5 million miles. Compared to just about, and if you compare it to just about any other form of transportation, tankers, barges, pipelines appear to be the safest, most efficient, cost-effective way to move fuels. So that being said, and those are the statistics that support that, there's another side to the story too. So I wanted to paint one of the things that people in Salt Lake have been shown some concern about. See if I can talk and look for stuff at the same time. Oh, and I did it wrong, so I'm going to have to talk longer. Is that your incident here seems to almost got lost in the news. Over the last 21 months, there's been a whole series of significant incidents around the country. And it started here in Salt Lake City almost in June of 2010, and then one right after another for a while. There was incidents all over the country, and I'm going to play a couple of short videos now. One that just kind of gives an overview of the incidents that have gone on around the country in the last 21 months, and then one that hones in on one incident in particular. So hopefully the sound and everything is going to work for us now. And this, I think, is about a 10 or 12 minute video, and it goes all over the country. It's news clips of what's happened nationally in the last 21 months. And one of the things that's pretty amazing about pipelines right now is, for the first time ever, pipelines are usually out of sight, out of mind until something happens. But pipelines, because of all these incidents and because of some other economics of pipelines right now, have been raised to a national level. I think it was just last week, the president and two of the major contenders for that office all were talking about pipelines at campaign things on the same day. That's unheard of. Usually, you know, the 10 years previously, I'm not sure I ever heard the president talk about pipelines at all.
And I came down here and saw this beautiful mess. It looks like the Exxon Valdez spill.
June 12th, some Salt Lake City residents notice a sheen on their backyard pond. Sometime early in the morning, Chevron's pipeline had started leaking near Red Butte Canyon, and 33,000 gallons of crude oil began flowing downstream as far as Liberty Park.
It's unbelievable. It's hard to imagine, but you see the Gulf spill and it seems so far away, and now this is right in my backyard.
Disaster crews set booms in the water to try to stop the oil. Chevron immediately accepted full responsibility.
Federal officials have responded to what is now being called a full-scale environmental emergency.
Not going to be easy to remove nearly 33,000 gallons of oil from creeks and ponds and rivers.
Cleanup is far from over along the Red Butte Creek as Chevron workers wade through the water, laying down absorbent pads to soak up the dark oil running all the way down through the Jordan River.
Chevron says the detection system did not work and the crude oil leaked for hours.
Chevron characterized the spill as a 1 in a million event. But John Daly reports neighbors and government watchdogs are calling for tougher oversight and penalties for an accident they say never should have happened.
And with the current sensitivity about oil, a spill in Michigan is getting a lot of attention. A leaking pipeline that sent oil into a creek that feeds the Kalamazoo River. And while booms have been deployed, an estimated 848,000 gallons of oil has already escaped here. Trails of oil sheen can be seen all the way downriver, far from the bulk of the spill. It's coming from a 30-inch pipe that runs from Indiana to Ontario, owned by a Canadian company, Enbridge. It carries 8 million gallons a day. Officials say they don't know what caused that pipe to start leaking yesterday.
Parts of San Bruno, California were turned into a raging inferno around dinner time Thursday evening. Flames roared some 60 feet into the air as block after block in this residential neighborhood, about 5 miles from San Francisco's airport, were engulfed. Witnesses reported hearing and feeling a large explosion, leading to early speculation that a plane may have gone down. But it was a high-pressure natural gas line that ruptured, caused the explosion, and then fueled the spectacular blaze. The local utility company, Pacific Gas and Electric, says they will be accountable if it's determined they were at fault.
A terrible, terrible tragedy has fallen on our city this afternoon. Our main concern as public officials here, making sure our citizens are safe.
The view from the sky revealed a large swath of the neighborhood reduced to embers and ash. More than 50 homes were destroyed and more than 100 damaged.
But I lost everything. Everything. I understand that. It's gone. It's history.
Is there any way to describe what you were feeling?
It was like hell on earth. It really was. It was like hell on earth. I mean, it was like all you see is 80-foot flames and intense flames.
Initially, NTSB investigators say the pipe has some obvious areas of concern. It is old, installed in 1956, with welding points that officials say are no longer commonly used. That includes a long welded seam that runs the length of the line and is potentially susceptible to corrosion. But there is also a section designed to bend under a dip in the road, the exact section that blew, put together by a hodgepodge of smaller pieces. Officials say that while modern methods are to bend a pipe to fit a curve, this pipe was pieced together by small sections called pups, each one forging a turn in the pipe, each one offering investigators another decades-old welding job that could have been a weak point. Snapshots of the aftermath paint a vivid picture of destruction and loss, the sort of thing you'd be forgiven for thinking you've seen before. But this event is different, and pipelines like the one that caused it are underground, crisscrossing their way through neighborhoods from coast to coast.
What does that tell you?
Well, we don't know yet until the National Transportation Safety Board tells us what caused that accident. But I think we can all draw the conclusion that the aging infrastructure in this country and the fact that we've now had actually several pipeline bursts and several pipeline spills across the country in recent months are beginning to be suggestive that the former ways that we did things may not be good enough in an era when the infrastructure is aging. Some of these pipes are 50 years old, 60 years old, some even older than that.
Enbridge spills more oil, this time in the state of Illinois. The company responsible for the July oil spill into the Kalamazoo River in Marshall has a pipeline spring another leak. In a press release tonight, the company says the spill happened here in Romeoville, Illinois. That's about 30 miles southwest of the city of Chicago. They say oil spilled from a pipeline onto a roadway there and then into a nearby retention pond. What isn't known yet is how that pipeline burst, but they say the flow was shut down within minutes of the leak, and no injuries have been reported tonight. 7th District Congressman, though, Mark Showers, says the incident illustrates the need to fully inspect the Lakehead oil transport system. That's the one operated by Enbridge.
I was stunned. It's hard to believe, but it reinforces, my commitment to do everything I can to make sure that this pipeline has been fully inspected and repaired before oil starts flowing through it again.
But to do that, it would need the backing of congressmen from a number of other states besides our own. Right now, there is no estimate on just how large that new oil spill is.
Less than 6 months later, another leak from the same pipeline. The second spill did not cause as much damage, but residents and city officials were upset.
I'm floored. I'm devastated. Why are we allowing this to happen?
Chevron says a faulty valve caused the second leak of about 500 barrels of oil. Chevron issued an apology and said the company is committed to working with federal regulators and Salt Lake City to ensure incident-free operation of the pipeline.
In Pennsylvania, where investigators remain at the scene of an explosion that was all captured by a news photographer at the NBC station in Philadelphia. Take a look at this. Wow, this happened in the Tacony neighborhood of Philly. A utility worker who had responded to a report of some leaking natural gas was killed in this blast. A firefighter and 4 others were injured. Crews were trying to repair a break in the line last night when the explosion happened. 3 of the workers remain in critical condition this morning. The fire from this explosion kept burning for about 3 hours until the gas was shut off to the whole neighborhood. The blast was so powerful it could actually be seen 10 miles away in New Jersey. About 75 people had to be evacuated from their homes until the danger was clear.
Another natural gas explosion in another quiet neighborhood in America. One so forceful it leveled houses, and the latest disaster in Allentown, Pennsylvania follows a terrible explosion in San Bruno, California, you may remember, and another one in Philadelphia. So we asked David Curley what this is saying about aging pipes, natural gas, and danger for everyone at home.
Just before bedtime in this former steel town, a massive explosion and a gas-fed inferno. Daylight this morning revealed what looks like a war zone. The house where the natural gas exploded, nothing more than a crater. It was the home of William and Beatrice Hall, a couple in their 70s. They were killed. And next door, a 4-month-old boy, a 16-year-old, and one of their parents also killed. Mayor Ed Pawlowski took us to the scene. This is the house that actually started, and it's gone.
Yes, it's gone.
This is just the latest explosion. 3 weeks ago in Philadelphia, this blast killed one. Last year, there was a spike in the number of deaths involving pipeline explosions. And watchdog groups don't believe the federal government is doing enough to safeguard us from these aging pipelines. There are nearly 2.5 million miles of pipes delivering natural gas to our homes.
Are we inspecting enough? No. Are we putting the money into this, giving the attention? The answer is no.
On Tuesday, the day before the explosion here in Allentown, the utility inspected the area and no leak was detected. It was a cast iron pipe installed in 1928 which fed this explosion. A lot of our old cities face the same problem you do.
They do, and it's a huge problem, and it's one that right now seems unsolvable. They're going to have lines that are going to break, they're going to rupture, and unfortunately lead to disasters like this.
And many wonder if enough is being done to prevent these disasters.
Hundreds of cleanup crews are scouring the banks of the Yellowstone after a pipeline break this weekend sent an estimated 1,000 barrels of crude oil into the river. The cause of the breach is still a big question mark.
Hundreds of workers line the shore of the Yellowstone River in Laurel. It's the area hit hardest by a pipeline leak that sent as many as 1,000 barrels, or 55,000 gallons, of crude oil into the waterway.
That's where we have most of the resources deployed right now, and we are certainly committed to be here until all the cleanup is done.
ExxonMobil Pipeline Company President Gary Prusing addressed the media Monday morning. He says the cause of the disaster and the scope of the cleanup ahead are still unclear, but 32,000 feet of oil-absorbent boom and 2,300 pads line the river and its shore.
And we will work with the individual homeowners. We want to make sure that they're kept whole.
Prusing says they've received 71 phone calls from homeowners looking to make a claim.
So again, I just want to apologize for the first one.
But Billings resident Mike Scott says he can't wait any longer for answers.
I really don't want another private meeting. I mean, all due respect, but I just want some answers. That's all. I know 2 people in the hospital already over this. One person just passed out last night because of the fumes, and now my wife. And I don't believe that you don't know what's in the oil, what's making people sick.
Hospital spokespeople say there has been at least one oil-related emergency room visit. Exxon and government agencies, such as the EPA, are monitoring the river and air for toxins and have not found problems so far. But Scott says his wife has been diagnosed with a related disease. A team is investigating the incident, but the river levels will have to drop before conclusions surface.
In their biggest demonstration yet,
we don't want no climate drama.
More than 1,000 protesters had tough words for a president they helped elect. If he were to approve the pipeline, would you vote for him in 2012?
The answer to that is, you know what? I might not.
They want President Obama to kill the Keystone oil pipeline, which would run 1,700 miles underground from western Canada across 6 states down to refineries in the Gulf of Mexico. TransCanada CEO Russ Girling says the project would create 20,000 jobs and that the protests have come as a surprise.
We never expected to be the lightning rod for the development of the Canadian oil sands. At the end of the day, we build a conduit from A to B.
Union leader David Molino of Laborers International calls it a no-brainer.
This pipeline is not just a pipeline, it's a lifeline for many of our members.
But the Canadian crude is mixed with sand. It's hard to extract, having to be dug or steamed out of the ground. a process that pumps greenhouse gas into the atmosphere. Environmentalists like Susan Casey Lefkowitz say it's the dirtiest oil on the planet.
What the major oil companies are doing now is they're going after the more destructive, more expensive, more risky forms of oil.
Politically, it's a tough spot for the president, pitting major labor unions against environmentalists, two groups that will be an important part of his re-election bid. Although the president is under pressure to create jobs, environmentalists say the Keystone Pipeline is not the way to do it.
And so this president, bowing to the special interests in his party, the most extreme environmentalists, I mean the 1% of environmentalists in this country think that's a great idea, he is saying we're going to stall on this pipeline. We need the oil. We need the gas. America and North America are energy rich. He's treating us like we're energy poor. It's time to have a president who will develop our resources in this country and get us off of foreign oil.
So that's the context. As you saw the graphs, the chance of this happening anywhere is really, really, really small. But from the public perspective, what you see of the news stories, and in the last 21 months, the news stories have been recurring quite often. I've got one other one that I'm going to play, and then we're going to take a quick break. What this one does is that kind of showed the chance of the pipelines having a problem, which is really small. Some of the incidents that have happened that show what the consequences are. This is a video that was produced by the National Transportation Safety Board, and it kind of goes into more specifics about the San Bruno incident, but talks about some of the big questions that have been raised by not only the National Transportation Safety Board, but the Congress in the last year or so. It kind of paints some of the issues that you'll be hearing about from our first couple panels today. So let's see if I can do this again. And this is about 7 minutes.
San Bruno, California, a quiet suburb located 11 miles southwest of San Francisco. It was here in September 2010 that a tragic accident would bring devastation to the small community of 41,000 residents and would raise questions that may take years to fully answer. Running beneath the streets of Crestmore, a quiet middle-class neighborhood in San Bruno, was a 2.5-foot wide, 47-mile-long natural gas transmission pipeline. The pipe was operated by the Pacific Gas and Electric Company, or PG&E, and was designated as Line 132. This small, tight-knit community is far from unique. Across the United States, there are about 300,000 miles of gas transmission pipeline that traverse urban, suburban, and rural areas. And just as in other places around the country, many of the residents in San Bruno didn't even know the pipe was there. That would change in an instant. Early in the evening on Thursday, September 9th, most residents of San Bruno were likely returning from work or sitting down to dinner. Then, at 6:11 p.m., a sudden, deafening bang shook the town. The sound came from Line 132 as the pipeline burst open beneath the intersection of Earl Avenue and Glenview Drive. The high pressure inside the pipe caused a geyser of natural gas to shoot upwards with incredible force, blowing a giant crater in the center of the intersection. Once above ground, the natural gas ignited, creating a tower of fire that reached more than 300 feet into the sky. Nearby homes and cars burst into flames, and in moments an inferno raged in the heart of this peaceful neighborhood.
I arrived just after the incident occurred, and the frustrating part in the very beginning was the fact that first responders were unable to do a whole lot.
Some 47 million cubic feet of natural gas was released before firefighters extinguished the flames. That's enough to power 1,200 residential homes for 1 year. Tragically, 8 people were killed. Many more were injured. 38 homes were destroyed, and 70 others were damaged. The next day, the National Transportation Safety Board launched a team of pipeline experts to San Bruno to investigate one of the largest pipeline accidents in recent U.S. history.
My first impression was the magnitude of the amount of damage done. Whole city blocks were just gone. Houses had been reduced to chimneys and foundations, maybe a car or two in what used to be the driveway. It looked more like something out of a science fiction movie than what you would expect out of what would have been a very densely populated neighborhood.
NTSB investigators immediately began working to find out why the pipeline had failed. In the days and weeks after the San Bruno explosion, there was public outcry and fear as communities nationwide wondered if pipes running beneath their homes could turn their neighborhoods into the next San Bruno. After nearly a year of intensive investigation, the NTSB experts were able to piece together the events that led to this tragic accident. The ruptured section neither met the standards of today nor those at the time of its installation more than half a century earlier.
The accident was preventable. First and foremost, if PG&E had had an effective quality control program in place at the time of the 1950s relocation project, this poorly fabricated piece of pipe would never have been put into the ground. Secondly, if PG&E had pressure tested the line upon completion of construction, it's likely this inferior piece of pipe would have failed. But PG&E was not required to pressure test the line, and over the years they've chosen not to pressure test the line.
These findings were reported by the team of investigators at a public meeting of the 5 members of the National Transportation Safety Board in August 2011.
We ultimately determined the cause of this accident was a flawed pipe, flawed operations, and flawed oversight. We know that looking at this accident over a year, that there were a lot of problems that PG&E had, but there were a lot of problems that were not detected by the oversight entity, the California Public Utilities Commission, and also the federal entity, PHMSA, who was responsible for oversight and doing audits of CPUC and doing audits of PG&E. I think what we identified in this accident in San Bruno was we had an operator, and the operator was really given a lot of authority to do the right thing. And what we found was that they didn't do the right thing. And so, as Ronald Reagan famously said, it's up to the oversight entity not just to trust, but verify. And what we found with the CPUC, and in turn PHMSA, was that they weren't doing the verification that they needed to ensure that PG&E was operating safely. There were too many times and too many missed opportunities where the regulator did not step in and say, this is what you committed to doing, this is what we expect you to do, or this data is not good, it needs to be improved. They need to take a hard stand, and I think when people violate the trust, the penalty needs to be high, because when we have an accident like San Bruno, it's too late.
The deadly pipeline rupture in San Bruno devastated an entire community. Its impact will be felt for years to come. A wake-up call for the pipeline industry, the tragedy reminds us all that deviations from safety standards, even something as seemingly minor as a single weak seam, can result in unthinkable destruction.
All right, we're going to take about a 10 or 15 minute break. Wanted to start that off to talk about a little bit about what the probability, very low, is, the consequences are, and then talk and show that last clip just a little bit because there's a lot of stuff in there from the NTSB about trust but verify. So you really need to get to know your regulators, the pipeline companies, and the public needs to figure out how they can do that because they don't have all the information. So our first panel after the break that's coming up, we're going to be hearing from some of the federal regulators, from a couple of the big national industry groups that think about these things and worry about these things all the time, and then I'll be chiming in also. So